Greetings to everyone. Greetings to our panelists. In particular, the topic of today's panelist is the role of the non-majority communities in helping reconciliation process. Mr. Votim Demiri was supposed to be attending this panel from the Jewish community. Nevertheless, I hope that we will have a good discussion on this topic. To introduce today's guest, Mimoza Gavrani is an expert and activist representing Roma, Ashkali and Egyptian communities. For years, she's been active in civil society and international sector. Sejfi Kodra from Turkish community is a politicologist and translator active in Turkish Party of Innovative Movement. Fatir Berzati from Goran community in Kosovo, who is chief editor and journalist in journalist agency Kosovo.com info. Welcome. We know that non-majority communities face numerous political and social challenges in Kosovo. Nevertheless, their problems often are ignored as a result of other social and political problems. Reconciliation is quite a murky term. There is no common definition of such phenomenon. Mainly, we talk about it in the context of relationship between Kosovo Serbs and Kosovo Albanians. Only very rarely is the opinion of your communities taken into account. Now, taking this into consideration, I would like to ask all of you a question, namely how the members of your communities look at this process. What to them means the reconciliation? Do they see this process as something that goes on only between Albanians and Serbs, or do they consider that they should be involved in all this? We can start from Mimoza. Greetings to everyone. I will speak Albanian and give chance the participants to put the headphones. Thank you for invitation. It's honor and pleasure to be part of this panel. As a representative of Roma, Ashkali and Egyptian community in Kosovo, I think that it is more than necessary to discuss about this topic in the sphere of public policies with civil society and all stakeholders that have a role in society. I think, Caleb, actually you asked lots of questions for starts, because taking into account that each of them for Rai community is a challenge in itself. If we start answering to the first question, namely how important this topic is for these communities, I think that the current position of the civil society of these communities that represent their voice, I think that it has not started yet. Unfortunately, it's at the 0 point, even though civil society is very active in drafting policies of integration and inclusiveness of communities. I think this specific topic that we are discussing today is one of the topics that belongs to the security sphere as such, and the position of these communities in this regard did not reach the sufficient level of trust in order to openly discuss about these topics. I think that there is a lot of room to discuss, because the Roma community in general, and when I say Roma, I'm referring to Rai communities, because I always refer from the European Commission framework, whereby as such they are named and are part of a package. So yes, there is a lot to be discussed. There are many topics that have not been discussed yet, and a lot of effort should be put in winning the trust of these communities in order to speak safely about them, because it's a reality. When we speak about the Rai community, considering the recent conflict and their inclusion in the political, in the social policies, this community was found itself in the midst of what history told us. So far, the narrative is such that places this community in a vulnerable position as a victim or other positions that encroach their security. Even though we have excellent policies drawn up, they still face discrimination. They still face prejudice, racism. We witness every day when members of communities lost their lives due to negligence of the security institutions, law enforcement institutions. So if we start discussing openly and set up concrete mechanisms in order to address this issue, I think this is the proper time. Actually, we should have started earlier, but we have to start working on winning the trust and then continue with the further step. Thank you, Mimoza. Perhaps at this stage I have one additional question, because a lot is being discussed in the context of reconciliation and facing with the past, especially taking into account the conflicts at the end of the 90s. It is known that lots of victims were from Rai community. However, but rarely is it discussed about this publicly. Do you consider that more should be discussed about this, so that the members of these communities have a feeling that their concerns in such reconciliation process are taken into account? Thank you for this question. I think that it is one of the very sensitive questions regarding the security level, the way it should be addressed. I think that the atmosphere in community relates to facing fear in discussing these topics, because even though they are victims of the most recent history, so a lot should be done with the justice system, about what happened in the past, and we have to work in advancing and raising the awareness of professionals from these communities in drafting such policies, such approaches, creating safe environments where such topics could be discussed, because we understand that these are very sensitive topics that have implications even that relate even to the lives of people, because we are witnesses the lack of functioning and of the justice system in the country. And I think, actually I confirm, that this is one of the topics that should be talked about. Thank you, Fatir. Thank you. With regards to transitional justice and involvement of Goran community in this process, through civic activism, we started initiating it. However, people in Gora are indoctrinated, frightened. They were not even ready to be part of the special chambers of Kosovo in Dragaš to discuss about what is going on. There is a tension in the air now. If this is reinforced with the expropriations without half legal or illegal, with the construction of hydro plants and other such pressures, yes, it does have influence. And Serbian and Albanian sides should sit and have an agreement about what next. Yes, we have to move forward, but we know that other non-majority communities should be involved. Whether they should be, since whether it should be through the office for under the Prime Minister, because they were also in danger during the war. But 2 decades have passed. Young people are not interested in who started first. They want to live. Goran community suffers because it is community that gets to travel, and considering the rough circumstances and conditions, we have limited movement, and such limited movement causes kind of pressure that could result in exodus, since they are not much involved in institutions. They don't get to work in Dragaš that much. So this is the triangle where we have to find a solution. If I may, I have an additional question before we move on. In a way, Goran community has a special position in Kosovo. Within Serbian community, the relation between Serbs and Gorans, when we discuss about this, is there a feeling between you that Gorans in Kosovo are in between 2 fires? If yes, what is this internal dynamics? Yes, that's so true, considering that Goran community functions in 2 systems, one system in Kosovo, the other in Serbia. We have Gora municipality, a number of Goran people receive their salaries, pensions or social assistance through Vranište, Gora municipality, and the other part is municipality in Kosovo. So Gorans are between hammer and wood. So the stigmatization of Gorans is done along 2 lines. Namely, they are categorized as Serbs or oriented pro-Serbia, and the second one, they move to another extreme where they change their identity and they declare themselves Bosnians. So we have this gap which negatively influences the Goran community and which is decreasing in number. And what is most concerning is that based on the last census, around 11,000 Gorans were registered, but based on the statistic agency, such number reduced to 5,000. So I don't know when such census took place, so that the number of Gorans decreased. We are not that much, but we are not that small to be reduced by 50%. Starting from the topic, just to relate to what Fatir said, and actually, yes, we do have such problems. First and foremost, people don't want to discuss about the reconciliation topic because they don't have initiative. They feel like alienated by the majority, Albanians, Serbs, because they are not mentioned anywhere, not even in media. some news about Turkish community, but we as a community, we keep peace and stability in the region in Kosovo. So yes, there are individuals who give their opinions once in a while, but that's not sufficient. A working group should be set up whereby all members of communities would participate and would give their opinions and their suggestions how to solve that situation, because they could also serve as an example to the majority communities, namely how to maintain this coexistence, how we could live together, how we can live together with other communities that are different from us. But we create differences on our own based on certain perceptions. Institutions are those that do the wrong, have the wrongdoing because they don't give room to communities, small, minor communities, and that's why we are jeopardized. Turkish community lives in urban areas, and in terms of percentage is the most educated community in Kosovo, because our young people leave because they don't see perspective here, and they start losing trust about better future. So there is a lot of confusion as how this is going to work out and what's going to happen to us when the number of people decreases, and whether we will be in the same position as we are now. Now it's not about getting more positions or rights, but also maintaining the rights that we already have. Just to ask you, since you mentioned during your speech the issue of perception, how is the perception in Kosovo, particularly in your community? How is Turkish identity perceived? How do they see it? Particularly when we speak about learning a language, culture, history in Kosovo. Regarding history, you raised an important topic. In terms of history, we have problems with textbooks because all books speak about different variants about the historical facts, be that in Albanian, Serbian, or Turkish. That's why there is no compromise in this regard. The working group should be set up that strike a balance, and such textbooks would be harmonized. And this is the way it should function, because such books create such perceptions. The way our children learn from those books and create their beliefs. Fortunately, we have a bigger number of sources, internet, and they can obtain information in other ways. But I mean, small children to show interest in these problems comes through years. So when they reach such years, you are already a formed personality, and I don't know to what extent such information would influence you, be such information true or false. If I may, one more short question. You mentioned the youth, which is interesting. Is there a gap between Turkish that live in municipalities such as Mitrovica, that are in majority, and those in Mamusha, when we speak about creating identity? Yes, creating of identity. For example, in Mamusha, they are in advantage because they are majority. They have active organizations. They have their own municipality, and they can get the service easier. And Turkish community in Mitrovica is much smaller in number, and it's the field is quite difficult in Mitrovica for a Turkish community, and in order to obtain certain service or raise their voice, they have to make more efforts than the community in Mamusha that has access to more resources. Thank you very much. Mimoza, I have a question for you. You touched upon this topic already during your speech, but when we discuss about reconciliation in Kosovo, mainly it is understood as a two-way process between Albanians and Serbs, and more or less we came to a conclusion that other communities are ignored in certain way in this process. Speaking of Raya communities, how could they be involved in this process, and where in these communities are those needs for reconciliation? Initially, I would like to relate to the comment of the previous speaker who mentioned the part of books and literature. Currently, we are witnesses that in the current literature, Roma community is presented with a narrative that is discriminatory and pejorative. We are working on interventions required for such a piece of literature is presented to children in their primary education and beyond to change, because these are upcoming generations who would be negatively impacted and the discrimination will continue. I think that the topics such as a transitional right, facing with the past, and the topics that deal with what had happened in the past, I think that now is the time to openly speak about these topics, because we are witnesses that there are victims from these communities from the recent conflict, be that victims of rape women, which is a topic that has never been brought forth, and we are witnesses because the instances in which we live do not provide security, be that institutional or local, so that these victims come out and testify about their cases, but they don't have social support, institutional support, and policy makers and politicians of their own community did not start unfolding these important topics. And the current politics of Roma, Ashkali, and Egyptian goes to the daily interest and agendas, which are soft and well-known agendas that do not place community in a delicate position, because definitely this topic brings you to the position where you have to testify about what had happened. You have to, and which rationally implicates the other and forces him or her to testify and be held accountable. So in order to open these topics initially, we have to have courage, we have to speak, and at the same time we have to prepare a safe space for these victims, be that social or institutional, be that through the support of security instances, court, police, so that victims, people who went through as victims, who went this process as victims, to be taken seriously, so that Roma are part of discussions when these topics are brought forth. So they should be an integral part, an active part, and not consider it only a community representative without giving importance to their voice. I think that Roma should bring forth other topics that preoccupied this community for years and were shut in a certain box and considered to be part of past. But I think that the environment should be created in order to open them up. Another important element of census, previous census, was brought forth, and it is very important how a community is positioned in the country. And as such, I think that in the past these communities were degraded as they were presented in a very low number, which is irrelevant number. Currently, we are working with Kosovo Statistical Agency in order to create conditions so that the uh, people involved in the upcoming census will represent these communities, so that community will feel comfortable in presenting their ethnicity, their background. I think that it is very well known that Roma in Kosovo specifically, and I can speak with responsibility, that they are community that in one way or another aim peace. They always aim peace. They didn't have policies or interests, be that for their gain. They try to build peace regardless of their place of residence, and I can see the same in Mitrovica. They always tried, yes, they face extreme poverty. Nevertheless, they try to provide for their family. After so many years, they benefited from the transition. There are some shortcomings, but the civil society and new generations succeeded in raising the level of education in several areas. That's why I consider that it is very important for them to be part of important discussions, professional qualification and advancement in addressing these areas, because these are areas that require high level of expertise in knowing the current legislation, and their address should be a real, actual, namely transitional right, so that I consider that these are processes that have not been closed yet. Thank you very much for your answer. Now, I would like to ask you about the social activism in these communities, because this is a factor. We are talking about something which is less realistic than something that is imposed by the international community or civil sector. We had a focus group several months ago with the Roma community, and they, in many occasions, mentioned Black Lives Matters. I apologize. I don't know if there is adequate Serbian translation for the movement in the U.S. But how would you see the current position of the social activism in these communities? As I said earlier, from a general sphere, I think that civil society of these communities is reinforced, is strengthened, and has relevant practice in addressing general issues in these communities. I think that it varies from the position and the place from where these committees come, because the Roma community in Gračanica does not have the same needs as the community Rom in prison in terms of education or inclusiveness in decision making, or many other inclusions that would make them stronger in addressing their voice. At the same time, to address the important topics that we are discussing today. I think that as such, currently the civil society, because just yesterday I was in a conference supported by UN office in Kosovo, where Ms. Emilia Regipi, Deputy Prime Minister, was also present, who in her agenda has communities, and the very presence of hers was very important, but we discussed the most important document that the government as such has, namely strategy for integration of these communities. So this strategy is the third strategy that the the government is producing, and where these communities take active part in identifying the needs of the communities, in implementing the plans and activities that later are translated in local activities where the municipalities directly have responsibility for implementation. And strategy has a value of 18 million euros, whereby the government will allocate such funds for implementation. I have to say that civil society is very well aware of the topics that relate to advocacy, human rights, inclusiveness of women, but also implementation of specific targets of the Poznan Declaration that includes education, health, employment, social inclusiveness, and so on. Nevertheless, going back and highlighting again that the topics of transitional justice facing with the past, I think, are very specific topics that have to do with the national security of the country, specifically for the position as to what had happened to these communities in the past, what is their current position, and how to move forward in order so that the crimes that had been committed, and I'm using the serious terminology, but what had happened in the past, to be proven, measures taken, and we face with the transitional right. But I don't expect this to happen within a day. I think that it takes many years in order to create the preconditions to raise the level of awareness, and inclusion of Roma in this regard is very important because they are important members of this country. They did not come from after the war. They have always been there. They live here, and they are in the position of victim, and they are in vulnerable position. Thank you, Mimoza. Fatir, I have a question for you. I will taking into account the specific position of Goran community in Kosovo. Do you consider that there is potential in the process of reconciliation, in the sense that Goran community be a kind of mediator in that process? If you consider that this is possible, how would your community look at this, and what would be the impact in the internal dynamics? Excellent question, but since we are dealing with a small community which is autochthonous, small in terms of number of population, it could be used, for example, as an example for cohabitation. We discussed with some of the participants here in the past decades. In Gora used to live the members of Roma community who had a handicraft or were musicians, until it was no longer possible to survive with such professions, and then they moved from Gora. So they should be taken as good example for cohabitation, because we also have Albanian community that shares that area with the Goran community. But again, we are a very small community that would be able in a way to have an influence other than the possibility for cohabitation and adapting to the living circumstance. I don't see ourselves as an example. Nevertheless, it should have a voice in this transitional process, taking into account that we had problems, and due to the lack of implementation of the rights, and people simply seeking way out. For example, we have Gorani, or cousins of former politicians, who was driven away because of the money laundering with ISIS. So they are using this vacuum and trying to find common sense in this senselessness. So we suffer from the rule of law, and this then affects the freedom of speech and then possibility for employment. Thank you, Fatir. You mentioned the lack of rule of law in Kosovo, and this is a problem for all communities. non-major communities in particular. You mentioned now various problems that your community is facing. In your opinion, is this a problem of political representation that you currently have? You said several times that you are a small community, but it doesn't mean that you should not have an effective and active civil sector and political representatives. So in this regard, particularly when facing with this kind of political and social problems, how do you see the position of civil sector and political representatives? Probably consider that all this could have been better, right? Of course. Precisely, this is the essence of the problem. Political representatives are representatives only when they have to withdraw their salaries from the bank, from the ATM machine. It's not that anything happens in the field. We have some misuse of illegal sales, expropriation, and so on. Civil activists more or less are frightened. They are there when there is a round table, but in reality, not much happening. For example, education for the teachers are uneducated. These are political stuff, and this is going for the worst, not for the best. When we want to activate something, they say, I want to work. I don't want to. When you see these political representatives, then they don't know how to articulate the needs of their citizens. They don't even know how to seek the rights of the Goran community. People are just trying to find the way how to survive. So I don't know what's going to happen with transitional right and with these long-term processes and continuous change in agenda, whether there will be reconciliation or seeking of justice. All this is due to irregular political representation, false reporting, misuse of institutions for personal gain, misuse of funds of organizations, again, of political representatives. All these discourage Goran community to get involved into this activism. Since we are dealing with a small community, we cannot compare ourselves with any community. A Roma community, not only in Kosovo, but there are tens of millions. The Turkish community, same. Serbian community, same. So we are a very small autochthonous community that tries to survive. Literally to survive. So we stoop our head, lift our head just to see what's going to happen, but we are not able to directly face these challenges unlike other communities. If we wanted to go out in the streets, we would lack people. One more question, and then do you consider that perhaps a factor in your community is the lack of some most basic rights, such as right to expression, right to freedom of speech? Is it something that comes from the inside of the community or from precisely this?
Da ako odeš da se požališ u policiju ili nazoveš vatrogasca ili nazoveš policajca i ti ne znaš da mu objasniš na albanskom i onda onaj koji treba da uzme tu prijavu, on ne razume šta ti pričaš i dok se to sve razume, ono je sve već gotovo. Znači nemamo primjenu jezika na lokalnom nivou, nemamo primjenu jezika na centralnom nivou, nemamo primjenu jezika ni u kom obliku, niti po sudovima, niti po policiji. Imamo neke prevode koji nisu ni blizu adekvatni. Jednostavno i kad bih tražio svoja prava ti ne možeš da iskažeš ono što tebi. Jednostavno nema znači upotrebe jezika. Onda kad ti nemaš upotrebe jezika nemaš blagovremeno informisanje. Kad nemaš blagovremeno ne možeš ni da apliciraš za posao jer ti ni ne znaš da to postoji. Onda imamo problem sa dokumentima. Ako završiš primjer po srpskom sistemu problem je oko nostrifikacije, oko toga. To je nešto sad apstraktno što se dešava i sve ovo znači ovaj sav stres koji se dešava je rezultat toga masovnog iseljavanja mladih. I čak šta više i porodica. Ranije smo imali samo mlade, pa se onda vraćaju, pa sad imamo porodice. I pandemiju neću ni da spominjem, pandemija je pogodila sve podjednako, ali jednostavno neshvatljivo je ako me kaznite, primjer za saobraćajni prekršaj. A zašto onda ne kaznite ove koji sprovode zakon zbog toga što ne koriste jezik? Jer to je ustavna kategorija. Mi ne tražimo, ne znam ti, kineski. Tražimo, znači, imate ustavne kategorije. Imate albanski i srpski jezik. Zašto ne poštujete to? Ništa više. Imamo ne samo, znači, to je situacija, primjer za zamjenika gradonačelnika, izbor. Pa ko će da bude, iz koje će partije da bude, pa ne može ovaj da bude, pa ne može onaj. Pa onda se traži neki kandidat treći iz civilnog društva, iako u Ustavu se spominje. Jednostavno, na svaki mogući način pokušava se da se izbjegne odgovornost od implementacije zakona i to je ono što je u stvari ta neka vladavina prava. Jednostavno, kad vi odete na sud i sudija ne zna da komunicira sa vama, prevodioc prevodi sasvim nešto deseto i onda imate tu neku paradoksalnu situaciju gdje vi ne znate jednostavno nećete se više obraćati institucijama, izgubite povjerenje u institucije i opet se svodi na iseljavanje. To je.
Hvala, Fatire, mnogo. Za vas jedno pitanje sličnog karaktera, moram da priznam. Kako bi vi procenili prioritete koje imaju trenutno vaši politički predstavnici u Kosovskoj skupštini ili na nivo lokalne samouprave? I nešto dodano, mislim, pitao bih vas i za ulogu Turske. Pošto ipak, na primjer, za razliku od goranske zajednice, imate tu vezu sa Turskom ili neki od vas imaju tu vezu sa Turskom. Hvala.
Pa postoji politička volja, kao što je naveo i Fatir, postoji politička volja o rešavanju problema sa jezikom, sa prevodima. I mi imamo još jedan dodatni problem, mislim, još veći problem, koji, mislim, naši građani, pogotovo koji žive u Prizrenu i u Mamuši, u tim sredinama uglavnom koriste turski jezik i u dnevnom govoru, i na poslu, i u školi, tako da se teško komuniciraju na albanskom jeziku, a kamoli na srpskom. Tako da samo stariji ljudi, mislim, znaju srpski, omladina već slabo, a, mislim, ima jedna srednja generacija koja je naučila albanski jezik, ali i dalje ne može to, mislim, dalje nije to na profesionalnom nivou gde bi oni iskazali svoje mišljenje onako slobodno. I tako da, pošto se i školujemo uglavnom, kao što i ja, imamo dosta studenata, usko povezani smo sa Turskom i većinom naša deca se školuju u Turskoj na raznim različitim fakultetima. I postoje i programi sa stipendijom i postoji programi na samofinansirajuće, tako da je vaš izbor, u bilo kom gradu možete ići da studirate i imate puno izbora, tako da iz celog Balkana, mislim, to nije samo za nas, nego iz celog Balkana, Turska koji ima politiku o proširenju, mislim, edukacionog sistema njihovog. Postoje i programi koji su, mislim, kao centar za vanredne studije Anadolu univerzitet, koji je jedan od uvaženih univerziteta u Turskoj, koji je otvorio centar u Prizrenu, na kojima postoje programi na turskom jeziku, ali sada dolazimo do toga kada završe, ja sam naveo već u prošlom odgovoru, da je naša zajednica stvarno, mislim, pogotovo mladi, uglavnom obrazovani ljudi, ali zbog jezičke barijere oni ne mogu da dođu do izražaja i ne mogu da se zaposle u određenim strukturama zbog tog nedostatka i tako da sa tim nedostatkom se mi borimo svaki dan i mislim što više imaju neke male inicijative koji su mislim za učenje besplatni kursevi za učenje albanskog jezika, tako što mislim nevladine organizacije koji se bave ovim temama, oni stalno su mislim da kažem i u sukobu sa institucijama zbog tih prevoda. Prevodi su donekle na srpskom, barem možete nešto razumeti, ali kad dođe prevod na turskom jeziku, to je katastrofa, to ne može ni Google prevesti. To ne može ni Google prevesti tako loše. Znači, ništa ne možete vi da razumete. Prošle nedelje se desilo da je jedna naša drugarica, koleginica, trebala je dati izjavu u policiji i tražila je prevodioca I oni su rekli kao prevodiocima da kasni, kaže ti daj neku izjavu to što znaš i potpiši se. I tako da je ona dala neku izjavu sasvim treće, koja nije imala vezu sa tom temom, ali je morala na to da pristane, jer bi trebalo da čeka i da gubi vreme sa tim. A isto tako i u Skupštini Prizren ne postoji adekvatan prevod. Postoje prevodioci koji su zapošljeni u opštini, ali da li bi oni preveli te papire, mislim, jedna je stvar prevodioc, koji prevodi, određeni tekst, a druga je stvar interpretator, koji su i profesionalni interpretatori, koji su školovani za to i koji rade taj posao, stalno. A kod nas su, recimo, uglavnom ti prevodioci rade i kao interpretatori. I sad, taj interpretator, koliko može, zavisi od kapaciteta i od volje i od interesovanja tog interpretatora, hoće li moći da prevodi to. Isto tako u zdravstvenim institucijama, kada se vi obratite u zdravstvenim institucijama, piše vam, tu vam pišu na neki, na papirima vam piše neki prevod koji ne bi mogao niko da razume, daleko od standardnog jezika. I tako da najveći problem sa kojima se svaki dan suočavaju naši ljudi je problem sa jezikom, sa prevodima.
I da li je to ljudi gledaju, kao nešto što ugrožava ne samo tursku zajednicu, nego zapravo turski identitet na Kosovu? Pošto, naravno, jezik je ipak ključna stvar u stvaranju bilo kakvog etničkog ili nacionalnog identiteta.
Jeste, to, upravo tako, da, ugrožava naš identitet i tekako. Osjećate se kao, osjećate se strancem u svojoj zemlji. To, nikome ne bi bilo prijatno. I tako da naši ljudi koji nam ispričaju takve probleme, pogotovo oni, ljudi koji su socijalno ugroženi, kada se obrati institucijama da bi tražili pomoć, moraju da, određena lica, iako ima dosta njih koji zna naš turski jezik, odbija da komunicira sa njima na turskom jeziku, tako da oni se, ti ljudi se, i još dodatno se pogoršava stanje, pogotovo sa socijalno ugroženim ljudima. Isto tako i na univerzitetima zbog nedostatka kadrova i zbog nedostatka studijskih programa. I isto tako i studijski programi koji su na albanskom jeziku, imamo mi pravo, svaka nacionalna manjina, čini mi se da nacionalne manjine imaju 12,5% pravo na studije u programima na albanskom jeziku. Ukoliko su oni zainteresovani, polažu prijemni ispit i mogu da, prate nastave, ali tu dođemo do problema da neki ljudi, da potvrde o identitetu se izdaju, to ću da upotrebim, na nelegalan način, da ljudi koji ne pripadaju turskoj zajednici, izjašnjavaju se kao Turci i zauzimaju ta mesta koji su zastupljeni za Turke. Isto ta stvar postoji i za romsku zajednicu, i za goransku zajednicu, i za bošnjačku zajednicu. Takođe imamo problema sa nostrifikacijama diplome koji traju od 6 meseci do godinu dana. Naša deca se školuju, mi se školujemo u nekoj drugoj zemlji, bez obzira da li je to Turska, da li je to bilo koja druga zemlja, ali to uvek nešto kasni. Ako se otvori konkurs, vi ne možete da konkurišete zato što nemate adekvatnu dokumentaciju.
Hvala. Mimoza, hteo bih i vas da pitam za jezik, pošto kosovski zakon o jeziku mora da bude jedan od najjačih u Evropi. Ali, naravno, je primjena drugo pitanje. Sad, postoji romski jezik, ali u javnošću se retko kad može da vidi bilo šta na romskom jeziku, u bilo kojoj sferi javnog života. Kakav uticaj to ima na zajednicu i kako oni percepiraju njihov položaj na Kosovu?
Po mendoj që kjo, do të tema e përkatësisë etnike si e tillë, specifikisht për Romë ka rëndësi të madhe, sepse si popull do të kanë një identitet të tyre të përmund që është gjua, është flamuri dhe të bazuar në kushtetutën e vendit, do të si të tilla si komunitet njihet. Prandaj njëkohësisht do duhet t'i ofron mundësitë që edhe ju e përmendët që në legjislaturë aktuale janë perfekte, mirë po ne jemi dëshmitar që edhe në dokumentet them 90% të rasteve në dokumentet publike qofshin lokale apo qendrore, do thotë vetmja gjuhë është gjua shqipe, serbe apo edhe angleze në raste të ndryshme. Rrallë herë do thotë kemi dokumente të cilat janë për romët në gjuhën rome. Normalisht që kjo ka ndikim në gjithë përfshirjen e tyre, në interesimin e tyre, kjo pastaj ka pas edhe ndikim të madh në procesin e cenzusit që prapë po e sjelli si një proces shumë të rëndësishëm, sepse në kalumen do thotë kanë qenë jo rom të cilët kanë vizitu vendet ku rom të jetojnë dhe kanë kryer do thotë procesin e regjistrimit e që pastaj ata do thotë i ka pru në pozitën ku detyrimisht shumica prej tyre kanë sheh identitetin e tyre, ku kemi edhe ulje të numrit të lartë të romëve të paraqitur në census, mirë po tashmë mendoj që prandaj edhe po ceki që shoqëria civile është mos e vetëdijshme për këtë dhe prandaj po mundohemi të i ofrojmë përkrahje qoftë në resurse humane njerëzore, agencionit të statistikave të vendit, duke ofru kuadro të përgatitura të komunitetit rom të ndihmojnë procesin, të cilët një do të ofrojmë përkrahje në përkthimin e të gjitha materialeve të cilat do të jenë në census, të cilët po besojnë që është një element tejet i rëndësishëm që do të sjellë rezultate. Kurse sa i përket iniciativave të vendit, qofshin ato kryesisht në shoqërinë civile, kjo drejt mundohemi ta praktikojmë. Mirë po për ne është shumë e rëndësishme që institucionet ta praktikojnë. Që nëse një rom që është nuk e di, ndoshta në një lokacion ku ka më spaku rom, është prezent, do duhet ta ketë do thotë ofrimin e mundësi që të ketë në gjuhën e tij. Kjo paraqet barriera të ndryshme të praktikimit të këtyre politikave, mirë po mendoj që si e tillë duhet të praktikohet. Ndoshta çka na ka ndihmuar neve, që është ndoshta në favor, është që shumica prej studentave tanë edukohen në sistemin e gjuhës shqipe. Pra romët përveç gjuhës tyre anëtare flasin edhe gjuhën shqipe, flasin edhe gjuhën serbe varësisht prej vendit ku kanë pas mundësi të jetojnë edhe të krijojnë eksperjenca. Tashmë veç kanë fillu që disa individ, ende po flasin për individ, të realizojnë shkollime edhe jashtë vendit në gjuhë të tjera, qoftë angleze apo gjuhë të tjera. Kështu që mendoj që jemi në një situatë të balancuar, mirë po gjithmonë duke favorizu rëndësinë e përdorimit të gjuhës së komuniteteve të cila njëjtë edhe është edhe përshkruar me ligj.
Hvala. Fatir, da li bi vi biste možda htjeli da dodate nešto, mislim, povodom ovog teme i pitanja jezika? Pošto ipak goranski jezik je zanimljiv predmet. Kad smo pričali malo pre da su možda Goranci između dve vatre, goranski jezik je isto tako nekako između dve vatre. Mislim, neki kažu da je dilekt srpskog, neki kažu da je dilekt makedonskog, neki kažu da je
uglavnom južnoslovenski jezik, tako da nije strašno. Većina goranske zajednice, znači osim što koristi goranski jezik koji nema svoja pravila i sintaksu, znači to je samo usmena predaja, usmena komunikacija, koristi srpski jezik kao taj maternji jezik i edukuje se na srpskom jeziku. Posle, znači, početkom 2000-ih tako, krenulo se i edukacija na bosanskom jeziku, ali to su sve, znači, kako bi rekao, manji broj učenika, radi se uglavnom o manjem broju učenika, većinom znači i osnovno, srednjo i više obrazovanje, goranska zajednica vrši znači na srpskom jeziku. Tako da to što se tiče jezika, uglavnom upotreba je toga. Sad vezano za ovaj popis, za zloupotrebe. I nažalost toga je bilo i 2011. godine i tu je bilo par neodgovornih individua koji su još uvijek nažalost u nekom obliku ili politički aktivni. Potrebno je da se obrati puno pažnje i da se naprave neka stroža pravila da se ne može odstupati i da se ne može raditi samovoljno da kažeš aha ti si znači iz ove zajednice. Ja se upišem ovako, znači tu se mora s obzirom da kao što je, znači mi imamo primjer stanovnike u svakom gradu Kosova, ne u svakom, ali u dosta gradova. I najednom se desilo da jednostavno nema Goranaca. Mi ne kažemo da se nisu iselili, ali ne toliko. Znači ne toliko, oni su tu. Oni su tu, oni figuriraju. I što se tiče jezika, sad da li će, mislim, to je ustavna kategorija, tako da nemamo kako bi rekao, šta da dodamo, s obzirom da romska zajednica ima specifični jezik i da tu mora da se uradi taj neki prevod. Što se tiče goranske zajednice, bit će na albanskom, bit će na srpskom i nije nikakav problem. Problem je oni koji će biti popisivači da ne budu politički instruisani i da ne budu ciljano uticali na demografske podatke iz ovog ili onog razloga, ali na štetu goranske zajednice, kao što je do sada bio slučaj.
Hvala. Imam još pitanje za vas, ali da ne budem sebičan, možda bi trebalo da pitam publiku da li možda ima nekih pitanja.
Kako s vas napravo ideš?
Za sada nema izgleda.
Apparently there are no questions. Apparently it is clear everything. Regarding the Brussels, if we speak about the Brussels negotiations, the result of that process will of course have a big impact on all communities in Kosovo. But rarely does the Serbian community, let alone other communities, are asked about their needs and all this. For example, what happened few months ago with the license plate, and more is discussed about the community with the Serbian majority. How do people look at this process? Do you consider that in a way they are involved in this or are ignored in that process? I think that in terms of figures, initially I think that the current government, as far as the implementation of the foreign policy, I think leaves much to be desired, because currently poor political figure is being represented in foreign affairs, because they have to be included in the agenda, as these topics have an impact on the lives of citizens, on the lives of people whose representatives were continuously in our offices until they got the votes. So the figure as such, I think that the people increasingly is getting poorer because the economy of the country is facing great instability, great instability, and same with the community. They are economically vulnerable because of their restrictions in education, social inclusiveness. Most of them live with social schemes. Then a lack of inclusiveness in the jobs, even though according to the country policies we are guaranteed at 10%. But there are various practices where others are registered in the names of the communities and they benefit from such registration. And the communities who are entitled to such positions, they don't get them. And I'm quite skeptical also about the political representatives from these communities. And I say this with full conviction because they lack political maturity and experience in participating in such topics. At the same time, until now, we've observed that there was lack of interest in participating in these topics. If we discuss about the major agreements, in the last agreement, Ramboye, we had members of Roma community. Despite the impact, despite the capacity, it's important. Inclusiveness is important. I think that back then proved that they are part of that important discussion roundtable and that things did not happen in closed doors. Unfortunately, today we have poor representation and representation of daily politics that community is uh, continues to be in the most disfavorable position. Fatir, with regards to creation, potential formation, that creation of that community, regardless of the fact that the majority of them would live. How do they see this? Would they see that their rights and interests would be protected in the context of that community? This is one of the current questions. Unfortunately, the community of Serbian, to us, nothing is clear. Some drafts we cannot. We have to understand first what is happening, how to include Goran community, since we lost the community.
Ima nekih entuzijastičnih osjećanja kod neke grupe, kod druge izaziva strah.
There are some feelings, some fears as to how will the environment deal toward them, but as we don't have accurate data, only myths, legends from politicians. Some of them say it will be great, some others will say it will become worse. So Goran community actually has no idea what that means, other than some populist promises until after the election, and then such politicians are no longer available on phone. So it would be good to publish as to what is that community. Does Gorani community exist and how it could be incorporated?
Određene zajednice je pozitivan, ne može biti onaj negativan. Kako će to delovati, to je apsolutno nejasno jer mi svi težimo ka toj nekoj...
Because we aspire to the rule of law, protection of living standards, but in fact we do not have idea what that is, other than the idea provided by the politicians where they make tricks and shows until the end of elections, and then right after the elections you see that there is no political will. Once there's no political will, then because if they signed, it would be good to see what they signed, not to tell us, oh, this is draft. But perhaps this is an issue of communication between the community and political representatives, because earlier you said that Gorans have no idea what is going on, but currently the issue still is whether they will be created, formed, and if yes, in what format. And this is still an unsolved issue. But speaking of communication, in your opinion, how could such communication strengthened. You mentioned the lack of political will. Where is the problem? Is it problem with political elites in Pristina at local level, or it's mainly problem of local political actors? In civil activism, when we want to push one idea, we lobby depending the level, whether central or international. So we lobby, we present advantages, disadvantages, but we have total passivity, inertness, be that of Goran community, Pristina or Belgrade. Someone says, Gorani are close to Serbs, you will be represented from Belgrade, but we have representative in Kosovo. Now we have a national body of Gorani, and there are many actors, but there's no specific initiative. Simply people are not aware, don't work, and then in coffee bars they discuss saying it's very good or something horrible. Simply put, they don't do their job, they don't want others to do that job, as long as they take 3-4 salaries and then everything is fine. Similar question for you regarding Turkish community. Do representatives of your community in Kosovo see any interest in Brussels process? How do they see this process? Is there any kind of communication when we speak about common interests between the community and political actors at central and local level? Simply no. No, they don't exist. There is not even an idea what this is. Brussels agreement. It's not that we have a reactive civil sector. Will tell us what's happening in this process, what would be our role, what would be our position after that. And that brings us to confusion, to insecurity as to what's going to happen tomorrow. What will be our role in general? There are some ideas that are positive because this would leave the path toward the European Union, negotiation, Brussels agreement when it would be ratified, but it's a long and difficult process. I don't know how long it will last, and in practice it has been shown that conflicts are difficult to solve. When they stagnate, they go back to the very beginning. The same thing is with various conflict zones, same story with them. There are some theories that would bring us similar to Bosnia regarding communities. There are theories that a new Republika Srpska would be created that would potentially create additional problems in addition to those that we already have, and that would be destabilization of relations between communities. Other communities would be ignored or even marginalized in such topic. So everyone has different opinion. Mimoza, you mentioned several times discrimination and marginalization, which is a problem not only in Kosovo but Europe-wide. When we speak about this discrimination, prejudice, and racism, in your opinion, in your estimation, is there a political and social will among Serbs and Albanians to actively face such problems, namely members of such communities? If we speak about civil society as such, as the general will for inclusiveness to eradicate discrimination in the country, I think that will has been there. But the key question is with regarding the institutional support, implementation of the rights that are promised and are evident for the community. So here is where the problem lies. And then addressing the needs of community, strengthening of the current mechanisms that are operational in the context of bodies set up by government, but they are not operational in terms of implementation. If you ask how many cases are addressed regarding discrimination of Roma community, these are numbers that we could count in. On the other hand, we are witnesses from previous years with a woman in Pristina who allegedly, actually she was a Roma, who was mentally sick and who was stealing children. Today we are witnesses that the same woman was not provided any institutional support, be that by the shelters in the country or social centers, and that lady was not given the opportunity to meet her personal needs, daily needs, be that in her place of habitat or in her dwelling place. Because the initiation of that case was developed in social media by people who were in the street and recorded it where that lady fell, and instead of showing empathy, the situation turned into hatred, discrimination, and anxiety. Unfortunately, this is the reality. However, but I think that it would remain such if we do not raise our voice, if Roma are not aware that even such rights exist, they have to be practiced and put in practice, and they have to be demanded. These are not things that can change within short time. It's a work in progress, and the biggest problem is to address these cases, to monitor them and follow them up, because an awareness and legal support is required. Ombudsperson as such provides support which is limited. Such cases should be are monitored individually, and as such they face shortcomings. And then we come to the problem and economic position of Roma community, because they have to be paid and there should be a steady, stable financial support. The community experiences anxiety, insecurity with regards to their welfare, their daily life. The cases that happen, they remain within the community and they are not discussed further. And then this is converted into another anxiety where people face misery. But are these problems seriously understood at political level? If we talk about political actors from Albanian community, is there a political will in order to solve this in a systematic manner? I think that in order to bring these problems into the agenda of the current Albanian policymakers, I think that it's a primary duty of the Roma political representatives in order to represent their community and address these problems, which are daily problems and not daily personal politics. I think this is the current responsibility because it is in the interest of the Albanian policymakers to show goodwill, so at least publicly they admit, because as such, they proved in drafting various policies. But I think that it's a primary interest of Roma political representatives to push forward these problems so that they become part of political agendas. Only then will they be implementable and would ensure sufficient awareness raising. Thank you, Mimoza. Fatir. When we speak about multi-ethnic cooperation, this is something that
u nekim određenim političkim krugovima i unutar NGO sektora. Kako biste vi procenili tu neku saradnju koju goranske zajednice ima s ostalim zajednicama na Kosovu? Mislim, da li je to sa srpskom ili sa albanskom zajednicom? Da li je reč o nekoj političkoj saradnji, o ekonomskoj saradnji ili recimo o svakodnevnom životu?
Što se tiče saradnje, Goranci su i pre tih dešavanja, znači i pre dešavanja i posle toga, imali svoje privredne objekte i funkcionisali su, znači u sredinama u kojima su živjeli, s tim što se taj broj smanjio znatno, u sredinama gdje su pretežno albanske i povećao u sredinama gdje su pretežno srpske. Znači polako su napuštali te lokacije i prolazili zbog osjećaja sigurnosti, bezbednosti ili više nekih subjektivnog osjećaja, sve to manje više. Što se tiče političkih predstavnika, imamo nažalost tu neku satelit politiku, jednostavno naš predstavnik je tu gdje jeste, on jednostavno radi po direktivama srpske liste, kao to nekog subjekta koji predstavlja te neke misli iz Beograda. Jednostavno, uopšte se, znači, imate predstavnike, bilo da se radi o srpskoj zajednici, jednostavno oni čute, sve da će se nekada da kažu nešto, onda oni kažu to nešto i onda strahuju da nisu možda rekli nešto više nego što su trebali. S tim što ništa ne priča, znači imamo iz Goranske zajednice hođu koji ništa, apsolutno, znači ništa on neće da kaže, jednostavno oni su taj nekog glas. I to se, kao sam rekao, negativno odslikava na zajednicu koja onda ne zna ko je njihov predstavnik. Jer u redu imati približna mišljenja sa određenom političkom grupom ili sa određenom ideologijom, ali nije normalno da ti nemaš nikakva mišljenja, nikakva razmišljanja i da sediš samo negdje u senci i da čekaš kad će 22. 24. da možda ubatiš karticu i da izvučeš i platu. To je ono. Sljedeći izazov koji očekuje...
The next challenge that the Goran community is facing was registration of a license, taking into account that there are many Gorans who use a license plate from Serbia, since many of them work there. Next week, so whether something will be signed in Brussels or not.
Hvala mnogo što ste vi to spomenuli, zato što kad pričamo o slobodi kretanja...
When we speak about freedom of movement, we mainly speak about the freedom of movement of Serbian community, particularly in the north, but often other communities are not mentioned. So speaking of freedom of movement, what is the current situation?
ljudi su čak registrovali vozila. Jednostavno on ne može da funkcioniše, bili su jednostavno niko im se nije obratio, niko im nije rekao, jednostavno mi iz civilnog društva i kad kažemo to se uzima sa dozvoljene povjerenja, ali znaš, on njega plaća Soros, uvek imaš neku etiketu koja su negativan. Mislim, to je tako kako jeste. I sad, ukoliko se ne reši ovo pitanje, bit će vrlo negativno po goransku zajednicu, s obzirom da ima dosta ljudi koji dolaze i putuju svakodnevno ili borave tamo pa dole. Imaju problemi i te izazove. To je nešto što sigurno zabrinjava veći deo goranske zajednice. Jer imamo taksi prevoz, imamo autobuske linije, imamo sve to izaziva još veću neizvestnost u već ovoj postojećoj neizvestnosti. I treba stvarno ozbiljno razmisliti oko ovih sporazuma, da se ne očekuje zadnji moment, jer narod je već pred nekim toliko zamorom da hoće samo da pukne. Jednostavno, do zadnjeg dana se čeka da bi se nešto potpisalo što možda se potpiše, ne znam te kad. To je ono što mi doživljavamo svakodnevno. Pa ako su Nemačka i Francuska mogla da se sporazumu i da naprave tranziciju, dok oni su imali na 1000 puta veće ljudske gubitke i zločine i šta i njih stvari. Mislim da ovdje ne bi trebalo toliko dugo da se ova stvar dogovlači, jer nevećinske zajednice pogotovo su osjetljive u svemu ovom.
Hvala mnogo. Još jedno pitanje za vas i onda možemo da vidimo da li možda imate.
One more question, and then we will see if there is any question from the audience. Earlier you spoke about language discrimination.
Jel bi vi to nazvali diskriminacijom i ako da li je to...
Do you call it discrimination, or is this an intentional discrimination, or it is rather a result of the lack of a rule of law in general in Kosovo? Both of them, and actually I would add to that lack of integration. Because in the transitional society, our people was not resourceful. They closed themselves in a circle, and I'm speaking exclusively for our community that live in Prizren and Mamusha. In other areas, they were better integrated because they were smaller in numbers, and in a way they were forced.
Predstavnik iz Mitrovice, iz Prištine, Vučitrna, Gnjilana, koji poznavaju jezik. I ta barijera je bila, znači oduvek je bila, mislim, zastupna za naš kraj koji predstavlja jug Prizren i Mamuša, taj kraj. Tako da, mislim, u rešavanju malo smo zakasnili sa integracijom, a imamo još jedan problem što, mislim, u našem gradu imamo jedan nedovršen identitet. Ili, da kažem, mislim, mešoviti identitet. Znači, imamo po školama kod nas, mislim, nastavu na turskom pohađaju deca romske nacionalnosti i goranske nacionalnosti. Tako da, mislim, tu su, mislim, i mešoviti smo i u školama. Tako da, mislim, imamo zajednički jezik, možemo da se sporazumemo, ali malo kasnimo sa integracijom. To nam je najveći problem, što i najveći rezultat zbog odsustva u civilnom i nevladinom sektoru našeg društva.
Hvala. Da li možda ima iz publike neko pitanje? Izvolite. Izvini, mene molim.
Greetings. Thank you very much for your discussion. In large part, I agree with your opinions. My question to all of you is, what do you personally consider could do that you could improve your status of your communities for a better future? I mean, something realistic. Thank you. we could work on informing them about their rights, because people don't know. People who are not from our areas. It's not that they are they are disinterested, but through political parties or NGOs, many results could be achieved in order to explain to them what identity is and what is their identity. Because in terms of numbers and statistics, the number of speakers and the declaration of identity does not correspond in terms of language and nationality. That's why in this regard a lot could be done. As the colleague said, it's not only information in terms of population. Population will adjust when that is representative of institutions saying that these are your rights and your rights. Going back to police, courts, prosecutions, health system, they are the ones that would say that this is not ethnic, mono-linguistic country. Should be a civil institutional cooperation. The country has to show the will when it sets up commissions in order to include the representatives of the communities. So it is necessary to have the cooperation of institutions and civil society, but serious cooperation.
Problematika ovdje. Znači jednostavno odete na lokal, imate rad sa stanovništvom, oni odslušaju, svi su zadovoljni, sutra on dođe u opštinu i onaj suče se sa tim problemom kažemo ovaj ne zove. Jednostavno krenu da vas shvate neozbiljno, s obzirom da vi ne možete da utičete na institucije, možete da se žalite, možete da stavljate zahtjeve, ali ne, se završava sve. Tako da ne, neophodno da institucije shvate da moraju da uključe zajednice i da im daju ono što je njima potrebno, a zajednicama je potrebno pravo na upotrebu jezika i pravo na zapošljenje, a pre svega ovoga potrebno je disciplina. Bez ovih stvari mi ne možemo da pričamo o integraciji. Jednostavno, ovo je segregacija u osnovi, nije integracija. Mi smo tu, ali nismo, mi smo na nekoj spoljnoj strani tog zvona. Hvala.
I think that question was addressed more at personal level based on the work that we do. So I am part of civil society for 14 years now. I can say that all my development as a person, as a personality, as a professional, marked a growth by facing these topics. So for a joint future that would be suitable for all of us, I think that we will ensure that through our work, through our very participation. This is the contribution, namely raising the voice for those who don't have such voice, who are insecure to address such topics. Personally, I try in professional circles to address topics, special focus on the inclusiveness of women and girls of Roma community. At the same time, I'm very much aware that the Albanian majority, but also other communities, including the international community, because Kosovo has many embassies and international communities that have special importance So I think that we as Roma community, I as the second generation in the family with university degree, I think we should give them the opportunity so that they see a different community that was subjected to transition throughout this history, be that facing with a painful past. I think that we should give each other the chance to get acquainted with our values. I personally had the opportunity to live in many countries in Balkans, but also Europe, and I saw that perception outside Kosovo about each community and the majority Kosovo is different from that is present here. And I think that we definitely have to give each other the chance regardless of their backgrounds in order to know each other better, to discuss more, to share problems, concerns that directly affect our daily lives. Because at the end of the day, living together and our contribution to such living is our own contribution and the contribution of the upcoming generation. We all take responsibilities for both the good and the bad things, but I think that we have to wake every day with a conscious, namely what to bring something positive so that others will appreciate us for our values, but at the same time we can learn because we all make mistakes, and I think that Kosovo is one of the countries, unlike US, Caleb, but it's one of the countries that gave to the majority of us to prove ourselves positively, to grow if we wanted. But of course, there are areas where we see discrimination on a daily basis. Just a month ago, I saw a Roma beggar being physically attacked in the middle of the Pristina Square, and I witnessed that myself. Now, how did I feel? That's very personal but also professional question that puts me in a very unfavorable position, but it does not stop me from taking further steps. What we need to do on a daily basis. That's why I consider that the responsibility falls on each and every one of us. Greetings to all. Mirdita, günaydın. I will speak in Serbian, even though I come from Turkish NGO in Pristina. I agree with most of discussion here, which is quite valid. Further, in the last mandate, I was a member of the advisory board in the office of the president. I was in the working group for the languages, and I am familiar with that field. The current law on languages in Kosovo is quite a good law, but unfortunately it's not implemented. It's not being implemented the way it should be. For example, according to the law, in Prizren, regardless of the number of Turkish inhabitants, Turkish language is an official language. Unfortunately, in Prizren, that is not complied with. For example, regarding the emblems, in Prizren there were complaints of a Turkish community because and this way went all the way to the Constitutional Court, which unfortunately the municipality prolonged the implementation of the court's decision. I used to be a journalist for 25 years in Turkish language. Oj, jak ja tvoj mikrofon smanjen, bre.
Formiramo nevladinu organizaciju sa time da ćemo izaći sa listom, ali nismo uspjeli.
Back then, during the communist time, Turkish language had much more rights. We had much more rights than now after the war, and this is an unfortunate thing. The freedom came, UNMIK came, but in the very first decision that UNMIK issued in terms of language, it said that Albanian, Serbian, and English languages shall be official languages. Unfortunately, the Constitutional Court from 74th, 5th article in the official use, there used to be Albanian, Serbo-Croatian, and Turkish languages and their alphabet. Now, with the unmixed decision, Turkish language was removed. It's not in the new constitution. Just not. I agree with the colleagues. Turkish community has many intellectuals. It used to have intellectuals before the war. Unfortunately, after the war, we lost a lot. For example, in Pristina, there were 135 journalists, 36 journalists. Today, they only have two. Now, it's another story, but we need more cooperation with all communities. Not these kind of panels we should not have only afternoon, but we have to sit here 2-3 days and discuss. After the war, I worked in office of Prime Minister. I was official for accreditation, but I only knew one driver who was Montenegrin. After some time, office for languages was opened. Some Serbs came to work. Perhaps this is a bit boring, but at the end of the day, it would be good to hear the voice of an elderly Turkish who hasn't forgotten Serbian. Thank you very much. It was very interesting to listen to your opinion. Unfortunately, as a moderator, I have to take care of time. Now I want to take the opportunity to thank you very much. I think that today we had a very interesting and very important discussion. I hope that it's not the last one. I believe that this discussion is only the first in the series of discussions of similar character. Thank you.